As the dust settled on the parched main street of Promise Creek, Olivia Walters stood on the auction block with tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face, her delicate wrists bound with coarse rope that bit into her flesh. The year was 1875, and this mail-order bride auction was the last place she'd ever expected to find herself after traveling 2,000 miles west on the promise of marriage to a man who died before she arrived. The auctioneer, a portly man with a mustache yellowed from tobacco, raised his gavel. Next up, we got this one. Claims to be a schoolteacher from Boston. Bit skinny for ranch work, and those fancy words won't put food on your table. Starting bid at $50. Silence fell over the crowd of rough-looking men. Someone coughed. Another spat tobacco juice into the dirt. $40. The auctioneer tried again, lowering his voice. More silence. Olivia's cheeks burned with humiliation. She'd arrived in Promise Creek, Wyoming Territory, just 3 days ago, only to discover that her intended husband, a cattle rancher named Harrison Bennett, had been killed in a stampede 2 weeks before. With no money to return east and no family to take her in, she'd been directed to this bride auction by the local sheriff, who assured her it was the most respectable option for a woman alone in these parts. $30. Come now, gentlemen, surely someone needs a woman's touch around their homestead. A few men shuffled their feet, but no hands went up. Olivia closed her eyes, unable to bear their scrutiny any longer. She'd been educated at the finest ladies' academy in Massachusetts, taught elocution and penmanship to the daughters of Boston's elite. Now she was being rejected at a frontier bride auction like damaged goods. $25, the auctioneer said, his voice tinged with frustration. Final offer before we move on. I'll take her. The voice came from the back of the crowd, deep, clear, and determined. The men parted as Yeager Whitaker stepped forward. He was tall and lean, his face weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes, a startling blue, were kind beneath the brim of his dust-covered Stetson. $25 then, to the gentleman in the back, the auctioneer said, relief evident in his voice. No, Yeager replied, approaching the platform. I mean, I'll take her, but not like this. This isn't right. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather pouch. I've got $342 here. It's everything I have. He turned to address the crowd. I'm not buying a wife, I'm paying for this woman's freedom. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. The auctioneer's eyes widened at the sight of the money. Sir, that's mighty generous, but it's not generosity, Yeager cut him off. It's decency. He turned to Olivia, his voice softening. Madam, if you'll allow me, I'd like to help you. No strings attached. Olivia stared at him, bewildered by this unexpected turn of events. This stranger was willing to part with everything he owned to free her from this humiliation. Why? She managed to whisper. Because no one should be sold like cattle, he replied simply. And certainly not someone who came west believing in a promise. The auctioneer's gavel came down with a sharp crack. Sold for $342 to Mr. Whitaker. As Yeager helped her down from the platform, untying her wrists with gentle hands, Olivia felt something she hadn't experienced since arriving in this dusty frontier town. Hope. I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Whitaker, she said, rubbing her chafed wrists. Yeager, he corrected with a small smile. And you don't need to thank me, just tell me what you plan to do now. Olivia opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. The truth was, she had no idea. Her entire future had been tied to a man who was now buried on the prairie, and her savings had been spent on the journey west. She hesitated. I'm not entirely certain, Yeager nodded, understanding in his eyes. I've got a small ranch about 5 miles outside of town. Nothing fancy, but there's a cabin where you could stay until you figure things out. My sister used to live there before she married and moved to Colorado. I couldn't possibly impose, it's no imposition. The place has been empty for months. He gestured toward the hotel. Let's get your belongings and I'll take you there. Unless you'd prefer to stay in town. Olivia glanced around at the curious faces still watching them. The thought of spending another night in the hotel, where the walls were thin enough to hear every drunken argument and raucous laugh from the saloon below, made her shudder. "Your offer is most kind, Mr. Yeager. I accept gratefully." As they walked toward the hotel, Olivia couldn't help but notice the way Yeager's hand hovered near the small of her back, without actually touching her, a gesture of protection without presumption. It was the first truly gentlemanly act she'd encountered since leaving Boston. "You're not from around here originally, are you?" she asked as they reached the hotel steps. Yeager smiled, a flash of white teeth against his tanned face. "That obvious, huh? I came from Tennessee after the war, wanted a fresh start somewhere the land hadn't been burned and fought over." The war. Those simple words carried such weight. Olivia nodded, understanding more about this man in that moment than any formal introduction could have provided. "I'll wait here while you gather your things," he said. 20 minutes later, they were driving out of town in Yeager's wagon, Olivia's 2 trunks secured in the back. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the prairie as they followed a rutted trail away from Promise Creek. "I should warn you," Yeager said after they'd traveled in companionable silence for a while, "the cabin's not what you're probably used to back east. It's clean but simple." "After the past few days, Mr. Whitaker, clean and simple sounds like paradise," he chuckled. "Fair enough. And please, it's just Yeager. Mr. Whitaker was my father, and he was a much more respectable man than I am." "I find that hard to believe," Olivia said softly. "Not many men would have done what you did today." Yeager's hands tightened on the reins. "Maybe that says more about the men around here than it does about me." They crested a gentle rise, and suddenly, Olivia could see the Whitaker ranch spread out before them. It was indeed small by Western standards, a modest cabin with a barn and corral, a kitchen garden, and perhaps 50 acres of fenced pasture where a small herd of cattle grazed. Beyond that, the land stretched away toward distant mountains, wild and open. "It's lovely," she said, and meant it. After the cramped streets of Boston and the dusty chaos of Promise Creek, the quiet beauty of this place felt like a balm to her soul. Yeager looked surprised, then pleased. "It's not much, but it's mine. Paid for it fair and square last year." "And now you've spent all your money on a stranger's freedom," Olivia said, the enormity of his sacrifice hitting her anew. He shrugged. "Money comes and goes, doing the right thing that stays with you." As they approached the cabin, a dog came bounding out to greet them, a shaggy black and white border collie that barked excitedly. "That's Buck," Yeager explained. "Best cattle dog in the territory and terrible judge of character. He likes everybody." Buck circled the wagon, then sat obediently as Yeager brought the horses to a halt. The dog's tail thumped a welcome in the dust. "He's wonderful," Olivia said, smiling as Buck cocked his head at the sound of her voice. Yeager helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a moment they stood close enough that Olivia could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, could smell the leather and pine scent of him. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat. "Let's get you settled in. You must be tired after everything." The cabin was indeed simple but clean, with 2 rooms, a main living area with a stone fireplace, table, chairs, and cookstove, and a small bedroom off to the side. Everything was neat and orderly, with none of the typical bachelor squalor Olivia had feared. "My sister would haunt me if I let her place go to ruin," Yeager explained, seeing her surprise. "She made sure I knew how to keep house before she left. Where will you stay?" Olivia asked suddenly, realizing there was only the one small bedroom. "I've got a bunk in the barn. Been sleeping out there since spring anyway, it's cooler." He brought in her trunks, showed her where everything was, and then excused himself to tend to the horses and evening chores. Left alone, Olivia sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. This morning, she had awakened in a noisy hotel, dreading the bride auction the sheriff had arranged. Tonight, she was in a peaceful cabin, free thanks to the extraordinary generosity of a man she'd just met. She should have been frightened, or at least wary. A woman alone with a stranger miles from town, it was the sort of situation her mother had warned her about. Yet something about Yeager Whitaker inspired trust. Perhaps it was the careful way he'd maintained a respectful distance, or the gentle hands that had untied her bonds without lingering. Or perhaps it was simply that after days of being looked at as either a burden or a commodity, being treated as a human being again was enough to win her confidence. Olivia unpacked a few essentials, splashed water on her face from the basin on the washstand, and changed into a fresh dress. By the time Yeager knocked on the door to announce that he'd brought some supper, she felt almost herself again. They ate a simple meal of beans, bacon, and biscuits at the table, with Buck watching hopefully from the floor. "Tomorrow I can show you around the place," Yeager said as they finished eating, "and we can talk about what you'd like to do next. Promise Creek has a schoolhouse, but no teacher since old Mrs. Abernathy passed last winter. If you really were a teacher back east, there might be an opportunity there." Olivia nodded. I taught for 3 years at the Hawthorne Academy for Young Ladies in Boston." "Fancy," Yeager said with a slight smile. "Our schoolhouse is a bit different, one room, children aged 5 to 16, and half of them more used to working than studying, but they're good kids." "I would like that," Olivia said, surprised by how appealing the idea was. "Teaching, I mean." "I've missed it." They fell into conversation about the town, the ranch, the journey west. Yeager was easy to talk to, articulate without being showy, interested without prying. As darkness fell outside, Olivia found herself stifling a yawn. "I've kept you up too late," Yeager said, rising from the table. "You've had a hell of a day, excuse my language. Get some rest. We'll talk more tomorrow." He bid her good night and left for the barn, Buck trailing at his heels. Olivia secured the cabin door behind him, changed into her nightgown, and slipped beneath the quilt on the narrow bed. Despite her exhaustion, sleep didn't come immediately. She lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the prairie night, the chirp of crickets, the distant howl of a coyote, the soft lowing of cattle. She thought of Yeager out in the barn, a man who had given everything he owned to free a stranger. What kind of person did that? And what would tomorrow bring? For the first time since learning of Harrison Bennett's death, Olivia felt a stirring of curiosity about the future rather than dread. With that small comfort, she finally drifted off to sleep. The next morning, Olivia awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of quiet movement in the cabin's main room. She dressed quickly in a simple blue dress, pinned up her hair, and emerged to find Yeager at the cookstove, frying eggs and bacon. "Good morning," he said, glancing up with a smile that transformed his weathered face. "Hope I didn't wake you. Thought you might be hungry." "It smells wonderful," Olivia replied, suddenly aware that she hadn't had a proper meal in days. The hotel's food had been nearly inedible, and yesterday's anxiety had robbed her of appetite. They ate together at the table, sunlight streaming through the small windows. Olivia couldn't help noticing that Yeager had shaved and put on a clean shirt, little courtesies that touched her. "I need to ride into town today," Yeager said as they washed the breakfast dishes together. "Need to speak with the bank about a loan to replace what I spent yesterday." Olivia felt a pang of guilt. "Mr. Whitaker Yeager, I don't know how I can ever repay you for what you did." He shook his head firmly. "There's nothing to repay. What I did wasn't a loan or an investment. It was just the right thing to do. Still, I insist on earning my keep while I'm here. I can cook, clean, mend. If you want to help out around the place, I won't stop you. But don't think of it as payment." He dried his hands on a towel. "Would you like to come into town with me? We could speak to the school board about the teaching position." Olivia hesitated. The thought of facing the townspeople again so soon after yesterday's humiliation made her stomach clench. "Perhaps not today. If you don't mind, I'd rather stay here." "Of course." He reached for his hat. "I shouldn't be gone more than a few hours. Buck will stay with you. He's a good guard dog despite his friendly nature." After Yeager left, Olivia spent the morning exploring the cabin and its surroundings. The kitchen garden needed weeding, so she set to work there, grateful for the physical task to occupy her hands and mind. Buck kept her company, occasionally bringing her a stick to throw. By the time Yeager returned around midday, she had weeded the entire garden, swept the cabin, and started a stew with vegetables she'd found in the root cellar. "Something smells good," he said as he entered, removing his hat. "You didn't have to cook." "I wanted to," she replied. "How was town?" A shadow crossed his face. "The bank approved a small loan, but the terms aren't favorable. They know I'm land rich but cash poor." He forced a smile. "But that's not your concern. I spoke to Mayor Patterson about the teaching position. He'd like to meet you, said they could offer room and board plus $20 a month." "That's very generous," Olivia said, surprised. It was less than half what she'd earned in Boston, but for a frontier town, it was a respectable offer. "If you'd like, we could ride in tomorrow to meet with him." Yeager hesitated. "Or you're welcome to stay here longer if you need time." Something in his voice made Olivia look up sharply. There was a warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a certain softness when he looked at her. "Thank you," she said. "Perhaps a few more days would be wise to consider my options." They settled into an unexpectedly comfortable routine over the next week. Olivia took over the cooking and household tasks, while Yeager tended the cattle and made repairs around the ranch. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, talking about everything and nothing: her life in Boston, his experiences in the war, books they had read, places they hoped to see. On the fifth day, Yeager took her riding across the ranch, showing her his favorite spots: a small stream where trout flashed silver in the clear water, a stand of aspen trees whose leaves shimmered like coins in the breeze, a high meadow carpeted with wildflowers where they stopped to rest the horses. "It's so beautiful," Olivia said, gazing out at the vast landscape. "I never imagined the West would be like this. The novels I read painted it as barren and hostile." "It can be," Yeager admitted. "Winter storms that freeze a man solid, summer droughts that kill the grass and starve the cattle, flash floods that wash away everything you've built." He gestured toward the sweeping vista before them. "But then there's this, and somehow it makes all the hardship worthwhile." Olivia studied his profile against the blue sky. The sun had lightened strands of his dark hair to gold, and his eyes reflected the vastness of the horizon. She was suddenly, acutely aware of him as a man, not just as her rescuer or benefactor, but as someone who stirred feelings in her that she'd never experienced with Harrison Bennett, the man she'd traveled west to marry. "Why did you really do it?" she asked abruptly. "Pay for my freedom, I mean." Yeager was silent for a long moment. "I told you it was the right thing, yes, but why? You didn't know me. You'd never even seen me before that moment." He sighed, then turned to face her fully. "My mother was sold when she was 16, not at a bride auction, as a slave in Tennessee. My father bought her freedom and married her a year later. They loved each other deeply, but she carried the scars of that auction block her whole life." His voice grew soft. "When I saw you standing there, all I could think was that no one should have to feel what my mother felt." Olivia's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, I didn't know. How could you? It's not something I talk about much out here." He reached out hesitantly, then wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "My father taught me that a person's worth isn't measured in dollars. And my mother taught me that freedom is the most precious gift you can give." The touch of his hand on her face lingered, warm and gentle. For a heartbeat, Olivia thought he might kiss her and was surprised to realize how much she wanted him to. But then he drew back, clearing his throat. "We should head back. Storm clouds coming in from the west." That evening, the predicted storm hit with unexpected ferocity. Rain lashed at the cabin windows and thunder shook the walls. Yeager came in from the barn soaked to the skin, having made sure the animals were secure. "That's a bad one," he said, dripping on the threshold. "River might flood if it keeps up." Olivia handed him a towel. "You're drenched. You should change before you catch your death." He nodded gratefully and disappeared back out to the barn, returning a few minutes later in dry clothes, his hair still damp. They ate supper as the storm raged outside, the firelight creating a cozy haven against the elements. "I can't go out to the barn in this," Yeager said as lightning split the sky. "I'll sleep by the fire if that's all right with you." Olivia nodded. The thought of him trying to reach the barn in such weather was alarming. "Of course, I'll get you some blankets." She made him a pallet by the fireplace, acutely aware of his presence in the small cabin as she prepared for bed. With only a door between them, Olivia lay awake listening to the storm and thinking about what he'd told her that afternoon about his parents. Yeager Whitaker was unlike any man she'd ever known, not because of his generosity or courage, though he had both in abundance, but because of his fundamental decency. He saw the world as it should be, not merely as it was, and was willing to act on that vision even at great personal cost. In the week she'd known him, she'd seen him gentle with animals, respectful of her boundaries, honest in his dealings, and uncomplaining about hardship. He spoke well but listened better. He worked from sunrise to sunset but still found time to point out the beauty in a wildflower or a sunset. With a start, Olivia realized she was falling in love with him. The thought was so unexpected that she sat up in bed, her heart racing. It was too soon, surely? She'd known him barely a week, yet somehow it felt as though she'd been waiting for Yeager Whitaker her entire life. A particularly violent thunderclap shook the cabin, followed by a crash outside. Olivia jumped out of bed and hurried to the door. "Yeager, did you hear that?" "I did." She could see his silhouette rising from the pallet by the fire. Sounded like a tree came down. "I'd better check if it's damaged anything." "You can't go out in this," Olivia protested. "Just to the porch," he assured her. "I won't go farther in this lightning." She followed him to the cabin door. When he opened it, they could see that a large cottonwood had fallen across the path to the barn, missing the cabin by mere yards. "That was close," Yeager said, relief evident in his voice. As they stood there, a bolt of lightning illuminated the yard and the figure of a man staggering toward the cabin. Yeager tensed, one arm moving instinctively to shield Olivia. "Who's there?" he called out. "Help, please." The voice was weak, barely audible above the storm. Yeager grabbed a lantern and stepped onto the porch, holding it high. "Stay here," he told Olivia, but she followed him anyway, peering into the darkness. The lantern light revealed a young man, perhaps 20 years old, clutching his side where a dark stain spread across his shirt. "Please," the stranger repeated, stumbling forward. "They shot me." Yeager rushed to catch him as he collapsed. "Olivia, help me get him inside." Together, they half-carried the injured man into the cabin and laid him on Yeager's abandoned pallet by the fire. In the light, Olivia could see he was hardly more than a boy, with sandy hair and freckles across his nose. "Who shot you, son?" Yeager asked, examining the wound. "Perkins' gang," the young man gasped. "I was riding for the Evans spread. Payroll delivery. They jumped me about 3 miles back." Olivia brought a basin of water and clean cloths. "We need to stop the bleeding." While she cleaned and bandaged the wound, a bullet grazed that looked worse than it was. Yeager gave the young man water and asked more questions. His name was Jimmy Hawkins, a ranch hand from the large Evans cattle operation to the north. He'd been entrusted with delivering the monthly payroll to a satellite ranch when the notorious Perkins gang ambushed him. "I got away, but they winged me," Jimmy explained, color returning to his face now that he was warm and his wound tended. "Lost my horse about a mile back, saw your light and headed for it." "You're lucky," Yeager said grimly. "The Perkins boys don't usually leave witnesses." "They're probably still looking for me," Jimmy said, a note of fear entering his voice. "The money's in my saddlebag, $500 in cash." Yeager and Olivia exchanged a look. $500 was a small fortune in these parts and exactly the kind of sum that men might kill for. "You'll stay here tonight," Yeager said firmly. "In the morning, if the storm's passed, I'll ride with you to Promise Creek and alert the sheriff." The young man nodded gratefully. "I don't know how to thank you folks." "There's no need," Olivia assured him, checking his bandage one final time. "Anyone would have done the same." Jimmy gave a wry smile. "Begging your pardon, madam, but not everyone would. There's plenty who'd have finished what the Perkins boys started just to get that payroll." The young man eventually drifted off to sleep, exhausted by his ordeal. Yeager motioned for Olivia to join him at the far side of the room. "I don't like this," he whispered. "If the Perkins gang is tracking him, they could show up here by morning." "What should we do?" Olivia asked, fear tightening her chest. "I'll keep watch tonight." "You should try to get some sleep." He glanced at the rifle mounted above the door. "At first light, regardless of the weather, I'll need to get Jimmy to town." "I'm coming with you," Olivia said immediately. Yeager shook his head. "It's too dangerous." "It's more dangerous for me to stay here alone if these men come looking," she pointed out. "Besides, Jimmy might need further medical attention on the journey." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. "All right, but we'll need to leave at dawn." Olivia returned to her bed but couldn't sleep. Through the partially open door, she could see Yeager sitting by the fire, rifle across his knees, his profile etched in gold and shadow. The storm gradually subsided, giving way to an eerie stillness broken only by the occasional drip of water from the eaves. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, Olivia drifted into an uneasy doze, only to be awakened by Yeager's gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's time," he whispered. The rain stopped. They moved quickly and quietly, gathering only essential supplies. Jimmy was weak but able to ride. Yeager helped him onto one of the two horses he'd saddled, then turned to Olivia. "You'll ride with me," he said, boosting her up before swinging into the saddle behind her. As the first pale light of dawn touched the eastern sky, they set off for Promise Creek, keeping to the shelter of trees where possible. The trail was muddy from the night's rain, forcing them to move slowly. Yeager's body was warm against Olivia's back, his arms forming a protective circle around her as he handled the reins. They had traveled perhaps 2 miles when Yeager suddenly reined in, his body tensing. "What is it?" Olivia whispered. "Riders," he murmured, "coming up from the south." Now she heard it too, the muffled thud of hooves on wet earth. Yeager guided their horse off the trail and into a dense stand of cottonwoods, gesturing for Jimmy to follow. "Stay absolutely still," he instructed, his lips close to Olivia's ear. Through the screen of leaves, they watched as 4 men rode into view, their horses moving at a purposeful walk. They were hard-looking men, unshaven and dusty, with the unmistakable bulge of pistols at their hips. "That's them," Jimmy breathed. "The Perkins gang." The riders paused at the junction where the trail forked, one path leading toward town, the other continuing north toward the Evans Ranch. The leader, a tall man with a scar bisecting his left cheek, scanned the surrounding landscape. "The trail's washed out," he growled to his companions. "But he can't have gotten far, not with that wound. Fan out and keep your eyes open." Olivia felt Yeager's arm tighten around her waist, drawing her closer to his chest. His other hand moved to the rifle slung across his back. The minutes stretched, Olivia hardly daring to breathe as the outlaws conferred, finally deciding to split up, 2 taking the trail to town, 2 continuing north. As the sound of hoofbeats faded, Yeager exhaled slowly. "They'll be watching the main road into town. We'll have to take the long way around through Blackwater Canyon." "That'll add hours to the journey," Jimmy protested weakly. "Better slow than dead," Yeager replied grimly. They set off again, now heading east toward the rugged terrain that skirted Promise Creek. Olivia could feel the tension in Yeager's body, the alertness in the way he constantly scanned their surroundings. Despite the danger, or perhaps because of it, she was intensely aware of his physical presence, the strength of his arms around her, the steady rhythm of his breathing. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist and turning the wet landscape into a steaming, brilliant green. Jimmy was clearly struggling, slumping in his saddle as fatigue and blood loss took their toll. "We need to rest the horses," Yeager finally said as they reached a small clearing beside a stream. "And Jimmy needs water." They dismounted, Yeager lifting Olivia down with hands that lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Their eyes met briefly, and Olivia saw something there that made her heart quicken concern, yes, but also a warmth that had nothing to do with their precarious situation. While Yeager helped Jimmy drink and checked his wound, Olivia led the horses to the stream. The morning was growing hot, and she splashed cool water on her face, trying to calm her racing thoughts. They were being pursued by dangerous men, yet all she could think about was the way Yeager's arms felt around her, the scent of him leather and pine, and something indefinably male that filled her senses when he was near. Olivia. His voice startled her from her reverie. She turned to find him standing just behind her, his expression troubled. "Jimmy's fever is rising. We need to get him to a doctor soon. How much farther to town?" she asked, rising to her feet. "Through the canyon, another 2 hours at least." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of worry. "I don't like our options. The main road would be faster, but the Perkins gang will be watching it. Could we split up?" Olivia suggested. "You take Jimmy to town by the fast route and I'll follow more slowly through the canyon." "Absolutely not," Yeager said, his voice sharp with alarm. "I'm not leaving you alone out here." The vehemence of his response surprised her. "I can ride, Yeager, I'd be careful. It's not about that." He stepped closer, his eyes intense. "I couldn't bear it if something happened to you, these past days having you at the ranch." He paused, searching for words. "Olivia, I know it's too soon, and you came west to marry another man, but I find myself thinking about you in ways that go beyond mere friendship." Olivia's breath caught. "Yeager," a shot rang out, the bullet splintering bark from a tree just inches from Yeager's head. He reacted instantly, pulling Olivia to the ground and covering her body with his own as a second shot whistled overhead. "It's the Perkins gang," he whispered urgently. "They must have circled back and picked up our trail." Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs. "Jimmy, stay down." Yeager crawled toward where they'd left the injured young man, keeping low behind the cover of rocks and brush. Olivia followed, fear making her movements clumsy. They found Jimmy conscious but terrified, huddled behind a fallen log. "They found us," he gasped. "Not for long," Yeager replied grimly. He unslung his rifle and checked the load. "I count 2 of them coming from the east. The horses are on the other side of the clearing. If I can provide covering fire, you 2 might make it to them." "We're not leaving you," Olivia said firmly. "You have to. Jimmy needs a doctor and you need to get safely to town." His eyes met hers, filled with an emotion that made her throat tighten. "I'll be right behind you." Another shot cracked through the air, closer this time. Yeager pushed Olivia toward Jimmy. "Go, now. Stay low and don't stop until you reach the horses." "Yeager, go." He raised his rifle and fired a shot toward their unseen attackers, then another, providing the distraction they needed. Heart pounding, Olivia helped Jimmy to his feet and half dragged him toward where the horses were tethered. Behind them, she could hear the steady crack of Yeager's rifle, answered by the deeper boom of the outlaws' weapons. They reached the horses just as a cry of pain echoed across the clearing Yeager's voice. Olivia froze, torn between the need to escape and the desperate urge to go back for him. Jimmy clutched at her arm. "We have to go, madam. He's buying us time." Tears blurring her vision, Olivia helped Jimmy onto his horse, then mounted the other. With a last anguished look toward where Yeager had been, she kicked her horse into motion, heading for the canyon trail that would lead them to Promise Creek. They rode hard, the sound of gunfire fading behind them. Jimmy was barely conscious, clinging to his saddle horn with bloodless fingers. Olivia's mind raced with terrible possibilities. Yeager shot, perhaps dying while they fled. Yeager captured by the Perkins gang, who were not known for mercy. Yeager believing she had abandoned him. "No," she said aloud, pulling her horse to a halt. "I won't leave him, madam." Jimmy looked at her through glazed eyes. "The town is straight ahead through the canyon," she told him, pointing. "Follow this trail, it will take you right to Promise Creek. Find Sheriff Davis and tell him everything." "What about you?" Olivia turned her horse back the way they'd come. "I'm going back for Yeager." "They'll kill you," Jimmy protested weakly. perhaps, but I won't leave the man I love to die alone." The words came naturally, and Olivia realized they were absolutely true. Somewhere between the auction block and this moment, she had fallen deeply, irrevocably in love with Yeager Whitaker. "Tell the sheriff to bring men," she called over her shoulder as she urged her horse into a gallop. "We'll try to meet you on the trail." Riding back toward the clearing where they'd been ambushed, Olivia was gripped by a strange calm. Fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by determination. Whatever happened, she wouldn't abandon Yeager. As she approached, she slowed her horse and dismounted, tethering it to a tree well away from the clearing. Moving as quietly as she could through the underbrush, she tried to assess the situation. The shooting had stopped. In the sudden silence, she could hear men's voices, angry, triumphant. Peering through the foliage, Olivia's heart sank. Yeager was on his knees in the middle of the clearing, hands bound behind his back, a bloody gash across his forehead. Two men stood over him, one the scarred leader she'd seen earlier, the other a shorter, barrel-chested man with a red beard. "Where's the money, Cowboy?" the scarred man was asking. "And where's the kid?" "Gone," Yeager replied, his voice steady despite his precarious position. "Long gone. Sheriff Davis will have a posse on your trail by sundown." The red-bearded man struck him across the face with the butt of his pistol. "Don't get smart with us. Jed Perkins don't take kindly to being crossed." So the scarred man was Jed Perkins himself, leader of the notorious gang that had terrorized the territory for the past year. Olivia felt sick with fear but forced herself to think. 2 against 1, and Yeager already injured and bound. She had no weapon except the small knife in her boot, a gift from Yeager, just in case, though neither of them had imagined just in case would come so soon. Her gaze fell on Yeager's rifle, lying abandoned at the edge of the clearing where he must have dropped it when wounded. If she could reach it undetected. Moving with exquisite care, Olivia circled around the perimeter of the clearing, keeping to the deepest shadows. Every snapped twig seemed to echo like a gunshot, but the men were too focused on Yeager to notice. "We can do this all day," Jed Perkins was saying as he pressed his pistol to Yeager's temple. "Or you can tell us where they went and maybe we'll let you live." "Go to hell," Yeager replied, blood trickling down the side of his face. The red-bearded man raised his pistol again, but Perkins stopped him. "Not yet, Clyde. He'll talk eventually. Everyone does." He smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Besides, the girl will be back." Yeager's head snapped up. "What? You think I didn't notice how you looked at her, how protective you were?" Perkins laughed. "She'll come back for you. Women are sentimental that way, and when she does, we'll have both of you to persuade each other to talk." "Leave her out of this," Yeager growled, straining against his bonds. "Too late for that," Perkins replied. "Clyde, check the horses. I'll keep our friend company." As the red-bearded man moved toward where their horses were tethered on the far side of the clearing, Olivia saw her opportunity. She crept forward, inch by painful inch, until her fingers closed around the cool metal of Yeager's rifle. Checking quickly, she found it still had 2 bullets in the chamber. 2 bullets, 2 outlaws. She would have 1 chance. Taking a deep breath, Olivia rose to her knees and aimed the rifle at Jed Perkins, who still stood over Yeager with his pistol drawn. "Let him go," she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. Perkins whirled, his eyes widening in surprise, then narrowing as he saw her with the rifle. Well, right on time." He kept his pistol pointed at Yeager's head. "Drop the rifle, girl, or I put a bullet in your man's brain." Olivia didn't waver. "You shoot him, I shoot you, simple as that." "You don't have the nerve," Perkins sneered. "Try me." She adjusted her aim slightly, centering it on his chest. "I'm from Boston. We take marksmanship very seriously at ladies' academies there." It was a bluff. She'd never fired a rifle in her life, but something in her steady gaze must have given Perkins pause. Behind him, Yeager was working at his bonds, a glimmer of hope in his eyes as he looked at Olivia. "Clyde," Perkins called, not taking his eyes off Olivia. "We've got company." The red-bearded man appeared at the edge of the clearing, raising his pistol when he saw Olivia. She swung the rifle toward him, then back to Perkins, caught in an impossible standoff. 2 against 1, Perkins said with a cold smile. Those aren't good odds, girl. Then let's even them up a bit. The new voice came from behind Olivia. She didn't dare turn, but the shock on the outlaws' faces told her everything she needed to know. Sheriff Davis stepped into the clearing, his deputy beside him, both with shotguns leveled at the Perkins gang. "Drop your weapons," the sheriff ordered. "Now." For a tense moment, Olivia thought Perkins might try to shoot his way out. Then, with a curse, he lowered his pistol and let it fall to the ground. Clyde followed suit, his face a mask of fury. As the deputy moved to secure the outlaws, Sheriff Davis approached Olivia. "You all right, madam?" "Young Jimmy made it to town and told us what happened." "Yes," she said, lowering the rifle with shaking hands. "But Yeager's hurt." The sheriff nodded and went to cut Yeager's bonds. Olivia rushed to his side, dropping to her knees beside him. "You came back," Yeager said softly, his eyes never leaving her face as the sheriff freed his hands. "Of course I came back." Olivia gently touched the wound on his forehead. "Did you think I would leave you? You should have." But he smiled as he said it, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "Olivia Walters, you are the bravest, most stubborn woman I've ever met. And you," she replied, her voice catching, "are the finest man I've ever known, Yeager Whitaker." His smile broadened despite the pain he must have been feeling. Even worth getting auctioned off for, especially worth that. She leaned forward and, heedless of the sheriff and deputy watching, kissed him gently on the lips. "In fact, I think that auction was the luckiest moment of my life." 2 months later, Olivia stood before the mirror in the small bedroom of Yeager's cabin, their cabin, now adjusting the simple wreath of wildflowers in her hair. Her wedding dress was not the elaborate confection she'd once envisioned wearing as a young girl in Boston, but a practical cream-colored dress with lace at the collar and cuffs, made by her own hands. A soft knock at the door preceded Margaret Patterson's entrance. The mayor's wife had taken Olivia under her wing since her arrival in Promise Creek, helping her settle into her role as the town's new schoolteacher. "You look beautiful, my dear," Margaret said, her eyes misty. "Yeager won't know what hit him. Is everyone ready?" Olivia asked, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her skirt. "More than ready. I think half the territory has turned out for this wedding," Margaret laughed. "You two are quite the celebrities since the Perkins gang capture, and of course everyone loves a good love story." It was true. The tale of the cowboy who spent his life savings to free a rejected bride, only to fall in love with her and together bring down the territory's most wanted outlaws, had spread far and wide. The $500 in reward money for the Perkins gang's capture had restored Yeager's finances, and then some, allowing them to expand the ranch and build a proper schoolhouse in town. Olivia took a deep breath and nodded. "I'm ready." They emerged from the cabin to find the yard transformed. Lanterns hung from tree branches, tables laden with food and drink stretched under a canopy, and at least 50 people stood waiting, the entire population of Promise Creek and ranchers from miles around. And there, beneath an arch of autumn flowers, stood Yeager. He wore a new suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his blue eyes fixed on Olivia as though she were the only person in the world. Beside him stood Jimmy Hawkins, fully recovered and proudly serving as best man. As Olivia walked toward him on Mayor Patterson's arm, a hush fell over the gathering. The setting sun bathed everything in golden light, and somewhere a fiddle began to play softly. When she reached Yeager, he took her hands in his. "You came back," he whispered, an echo of his words that day in the clearing. "I'll always come back," she promised. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, their vows spoken clearly for all to hear. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the assembled guests seemed to rise all the way to the vast Wyoming sky. Later, as they danced under the stars to the music of fiddles and harmonicas, Yeager pulled Olivia close. "I never thought I'd find happiness like this," he murmured against her hair. That day at the auction, all I wanted was to right a wrong. I never imagined I was meeting the love of my life. Do you know what I thought when I first saw you? Olivia asked, looking up at him with shining eyes. I thought you were the first truly decent man I'd met since coming west, and I was right. I'm just a simple cowboy who recognized something precious when he saw it, Yeager replied, his arms tightening around her, and was willing to pay everything he had to set it free. Not everything, Olivia corrected gently. You still had your heart to give. As the music swelled around them, they moved together in perfect rhythm, surrounded by friends but lost in each other. Two souls who had found in the vast wilderness of the West not just freedom, but love that would last a lifetime.